like the teaching profession,
Yeah.
staff in Auckland in the restaurants and bars are paid a bit more.
I think they are because there's been a real staff shortage. So particularly if you're at the sort of higher end, your service level is higher, you're actually having to pay quite a bit more to get qualified or experienced staff.
That's interesting. Blair, thank you. Blair Duncan from the Red and White Cellar.
You're welcome.
On the reasoning behind a $19 glass of Chardonnay. The fascination with Adele. Do you fully understand it?
I don't, but I have a lot of friends who do, and so I'm just going to be very quiet about that.
She swears. She swears, she tells risque jokes, and she's a very powerful singer. But she seems to have a certain magic, alley. This account from a writer for the New Zealand Herald who paid $750 to stand for hours up the front at the Golden Circle at Adele's concert in Sydney, and she got an exclusive tour gift, a commemorative laminate and a VIP check-in, and the gift apparently hand-picked by Adele herself.
Yeah, see, look, I don't understand stand it either. I'm like Emma on this. However, I have been excessive, I think, in the last year in what I've done musically. So flew to Auckland to see Prince. So that was very expensive, but I'm so glad I did it, especially, you know, as he died 2 months later or a month later. And just recently saw Bruce Springsteen, and that was in a corporate box as well. So wasn't cheap, but they're two performers that I absolutely love. So if you love Adele and had the opportunity to do that, then I can kind of understand it, but she doesn't spin my wheels.
No, and actually I should add a disclaimer there. I quite like her music, but I have a deep loathing of concerts, and so that's why I mean, you couldn't pay me. You know, I would probably pay someone to not go to that concert.
Well, it's probably too dangerous to drive to them anyway.
No, I just know. Yeah. No, all the people and the touching. I just, it's not me.
You know,
Jim, does she bring tissues? And has Emma got tissues with her? And does she
I've
wipe
got
her
hand
hands
sanitizer.
Oh, right, okay, good. Just checking.
What about giving the game away with how Adele gets around her concerts, you know, travelling in a big case, which is how she materialises in different parts of stadiums and
it's a shame that they destroyed that.
I mean, was there any reason that, I mean, British media found it out, told Australian media, who told New Zealand media, and now she won't do it anymore?
No, she'll just have to be more creative.
And Lord's dance moves on America's Saturday Night Live. While we're cruising to the end of the program, Lord is said to have delivered an epic smackdown, which is a term used when you simply approve of someone's argument, isn't it? Epic smackdown.
I think it's the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a flick. It's a...
no, I mean,
like,
she
destroy someone who's...
You know, but she delivered that, but because you like Lord, you call it.
Yeah. You approve of her epic smackdown, yes.
Yeah.
People criticise the way she dances, calling it charmless, and others like it for being organic. Should we care? Because Prince William's been criticised for his dad dancing, which makes every male on the planet not want to be seen ever dancing.
But doesn't it make him relatable? I feel like it makes him relatable.
Should we? Oh, okay. So you think it's endearing?
Yeah, I do too.
People don't really mind dad dancing, you're saying?
No.
Okay.
No, it would be more weird if he was doing some sort of, you know, doing
hip-hop or something.
Hip-hop or something. Yeah, exactly. It'd be mad. And actually, I started thinking back to the way some people danced in the sort of new romantic era when we were listening to music. And boy, there was nothing flash about some of those moves.
But yeah, leave Lord alone.
Yeah, I agree.
Ali Jones, thank you.
Thank you.
Emma Espiner, thank you too, and please come back. And that's us for another day. John Campbell's Checkpoint. Thanks, everybody.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, revelations the landlord of a West Auckland property submerged in floodwaters knew the apartment building was flood prone but didn't warn his tenants. He told us something quite different on Monday night. We investigate. A Washington watchdog group accusing Chris Liddell, an advisor to President Donald Trump and a New Zealander, of course, of potentially violating criminal conflict of interest laws. A company run by an Auckland cake decorator wins a $7 million contract to upgrade 2 West Coast water treatment plants. Former Prime Minister John Key and former Labour leader David Cunliffe leaving Parliament at the same time, and why a serious mistake in an NCA maths exam may have cost. Coming up after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The government has given in to pressure from Māori and will reword legislation about where children at risk are sent. It's faced a lot of opposition over the proposed new law for child, youth and family, which puts safety above placing a child with a member of their family or wider hapu. The Minister in charge, Anne Tolley, has spent the last few weeks visiting iwi around the country and says although the safety of the child remains a priority, it's clear the wording isn't right.
The best place for any child is with their family. If that's at all possible and it's safe and it's in the child's long-term best interest, then of course we want them with their family. So we've tried to nuance that. Clearly, we've nuanced it too much and we're in discussions about how we might ease some of the fears from people.
And Tolley says going back to the drawing board is part of the parliamentary process. A Washington watchdog group is accusing Chris Liddell, an advisor to President Donald Trump and a New Zealander, of potentially violating criminal conflict of interest laws. Mr. Liddell is the Director of Strategic Initiatives in the White House. The group, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, says Mr. Liddell may have broken the law by having meetings with business leaders from up to 18 companies, in which they say he held millions of dollars worth of stock. The group says it believes Mr. Liddell had not divested his financial interests before those meetings. The White House says it's working to ensure he is fully compliant with his ethical and legal obligations. In a world first, a New Zealand river is about to get the status of a legal person. The Whanganui River Claim Settlement Bill has passed its third and final reading in Parliament today. The river, or Te Awa Tupua, will get its own legal identity with all the corresponding rights, duties and liabilities of a legal person. The Minister for Treaty of Waitangi Negotiations, Chris Finlayson, says the legislation recognises the deep spiritual connection between Whanganui iwi and their ancestral river and creates a strong platform for the river's future.
Whanganui River gains legal personhood and becomes the first river in the world to gain legal recognition as a person.
Chris Finlayson says iwi have long recognised Te Awa Tupua through their traditions, customs and practice. The Westland District Council is re-examining all contracts issued over the last 3 years after reports a company run by an Auckland cake decorator won a contract to upgrade 2 water treatment plants. The Serious Fraud Office is investigating the council but won't say what it's looking into. However, it says no ratepayer money has gone missing. The Mayor, Bruce Smith, says the council has put on hold $470,000 contract for upgrades to drinking water services while it looks into all contracts issued by its asset manager, Vivek Goel. Mr Smith says there is no question of money being stolen or the council's balance sheet being impacted. Mr Goel is currently on leave. It's been revealed the landlord of badly flooded flats in Auckland was warned when he bought the property they were a significant flood risk. Ground floor units of the 14-flat property were awash with water during Sunday's huge rainfall for the second time in less than 5 years. The tenants are still struggling with the clean-up and say they feel abandoned by their landlord, Wellpark Trust. The director, Philip Davis, said earlier this week he had no idea the building was flood-prone, but a former council stormwater engineer has told Checkpoint he warned Mr Davis back in 2012 about the risk. The details are also in the property's LIM report. You can hear more on this shortly in Checkpoint. The police say a shipment of dishwashing liquid containing an estimated 160 litres of what it's called T-Boc methamphetamine is the first of its kind in New Zealand. The bottles were imported from Hong Kong in January. T-Boc methamphetamine is chemically masked to prevent it from being detected. Once across the border, it can be processed back into the drug for supply. The police believe it's the first time it's seized in New Zealand. Inspector Dave Lynch says the shipment could have produced about 120 kilograms of meth with a street value of $148 million.
We can't be complacent. As long as there's a market for the drug, people are going to try and find ways to get it in. Ourselves and customs with our overseas networks remain committed to staying up to speed with trends and really relying on intelligence from what's going on overseas to combat any new methods that may become apparent.
Inspector Dave Lynch. 4 men aged 59, 47, 38 and 54 are due to appear in the Auckland District Court today and the investigation is ongoing. A search and rescue operation is underway for a Swiss national who failed to return from a fishing trip near Arthur's Pass. Gregoire Bournon left his car at the Polter River car park near Mount White Station last Tuesday. He was due to return on Thursday but has not been seen since he left. A spokesperson says the police are concerned for the 24-year-old's safety, and a search and rescue helicopter has been deployed this afternoon to search the river, track and nearby huts. Gregoire Bournon, who's also known as Greg, has been in New Zealand since October 2016. Anyone who's seen him fishing in the river or travelling around the area or since Tuesday is asked to contact the police. Wellington College has announced the punishments for the two boys who last week boasted about having sex with drunk and unconscious girls. Both boys have been suspended for 5 days, had their leadership responsibilities withdrawn and have been barred from any sport, tournament or cultural competitions. They'll also do community work over the next few months and will undertake education about consent and healthy relationships. It's 5:06. In sport, there's been a double blow for the New Zealand cricketers ahead of the second test against South Africa starting tomorrow in Wellington. Left-arm pace bowler Trent Boult has been ruled out of the match after failing to recover from a leg injury he suffered in the first test draw in Dunedin. He'll be replaced by Tim Southee. The Black Caps are also without veteran batsman Ross Taylor after he suffered a calf injury in the drawn Dunedin test. The Blues coach Tana Umaga is refusing to put a date on just when All Blacks midfielder Sonny Bill Williams will return to Super Rugby. Williams is still recovering from the Achilles injury he suffered while playing for the New Zealand Sevens team at the Rio Olympics. The 31-year-old was training with the squad today and wants to be back playing by round 6 of the competition, but Umaga's giving little away on Williams' progress.
He's hitting all the marks that he needs to, and we just want to make sure that we don't rush him back and that he falls over again too early, so we just want to make sure that he's 100%.
Tana Umaga. Meanwhile, Saturday's match between the New South Wales Waratahs and the ACT Brumbies will carry added significance this year with the introduction of the Dan Vickerman Cup. Vickerman, who played for both the Waratahs and the Brumbies, died at the age of 37 last month. And Leicester City have scored an unlikely 2-0 win over Spanish club Seville to reach the quarter-finals of the Champions League. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the Great Boston Molasses Flood of 1921 people. While this week's overseas correspondent, Peggy Revell, is on the line from Canada, where things are getting decidedly tetchy down at the US border. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula fine today. Cloudy periods increasing tomorrow afternoon and a few light showers developing in Northland tomorrow evening. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumarunui, Taupo and Bay of Plenty fine. Taranaki to Wellington, also Taihepe, fine breaks increasing. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy with showers easing tonight and clearing tomorrow evening. Wairarapa, mostly cloudy today, fine breaks increasing tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury fine. Bulletu, Fiordland, also Otago and Southland fine apart from cloudy periods tomorrow morning and evening. And the Chatham Islands mostly cloudy today with fine breaks increasing tomorrow. It's coming up to 5:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Lots happening tonight, lots unfolding as we go to air. Thank you for being with us, by the way. We've just got the statement. You would have heard Katrina say this at the end of the news. It's just come in by email. Wellington College statement on disciplinary decisions. So we'll read it out to begin with tonight. Wellington College Board of Trustees has today issued the following statement. It's not usual for Wellington College to release the details of any disciplinary action, but we are making an exception in the case of the two students who have been at the centre of public attention over the past week. Of course, I'm just going to break away and remind you this is the Facebook comments about taking advantage, sexual advantage of a woman, young women as they are drunk. Effectively, as everyone has been discussing this week, rape culture. The statement continues, as a result of discussion with the boys, their parents, and in the formal disciplinary process, the two students will face the following consequences. Both students will be stood down for a period of 5 days. School leadership responsibilities have been withdrawn. Neither student will be allowed to represent the school in any sporting or cultural activities for an agreed period of time. Both students have made personal apologies and will undertake community work over the next months. Both students will undertake education about consent and healthy relationships. The statement continues, both boys are still under the age of 18 and therefore some details are being withheld. This decision is consistent with the school philosophy of working with our students and their families wherever possible to support them to make positive changes that will serve them well for the rest of their lives. We've been unequivocal with these students and the rest of the school that the views expressed online last week have no place in our school or our community. The school will continue to strengthen our existing education programs on healthy relationships and consent. These have been in place for more than a year, but we know we can do better. We are also going to work with our parent community because it's clear that everyone has an important part to play in keeping everyone else safe. That statement just in from Wellington College. Coming up on Checkpoint, 2 New Zealanders under the spotlight in Washington. Chris Liddell accused of conflicts of interest by a Washington watchdog, and Peter Thiel has protests outside his home. That's his San Francisco home, by the way, because he is, of course, now a New Zealand citizen. And we have more on the cake decorator and the water treatment plants and the flooding. A bit confused about the flooding in West Auckland because what we were told is not the same as what we are hearing. But let's begin with the former Prime Minister John Key and his opponent at the last election, Labour's David Cunliffe, who struck a deal to both leave Parliament without having to wait for the September election, but also not forcing by-elections in their electorates. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
John Key will give his final speech to Parliament next Wednesday before his resignation as an MP takes effect on April the 14th. The former trader and Merrill Lynch executive hasn't been clear about his post-Parliament plans, but since he quit as Prime Minister, he's signed up as a global brand ambassador for the International Sports Promotion Society, which supports blind and disabled golfers. Newlyn MP David Cunliffe will also leave in April to take up a job with a management consultancy.
I'm going to go and lie on a beach for a week between the old job and the new, just to try and detox. Parliament is a very special place. People call it the gilded cage because when you're in it, sometimes it's hard to look out. And that's, I guess, why I've always enjoyed being an electorate MP.
While he was Prime Minister, John Key donated what he said was a reasonable part of his salary to charity. As a former PM, he'll get just over $51,000 a year for the rest of his life. The acting Prime Minister, Paula Bennett, says it's up to him what he does with it.
Well, I think that that's entirely a decision that the Remuneration Authority make, and that's there. From what I've seen, John Key hasn't decided whether he'll take that or not, and I think it is fair when you've had a Prime Minister for that long.
And she says Mr Key and Mr Cunliffe reached an agreement themselves to leave at the same time.
Good on them, they're able to, but as I say, from my understanding, and Prime Minister's in the air at the moment, but from my understanding is that he certainly wasn't actively involved in those discussions.
The Labour leader Andrew Little says the approach came from National.
They came to us, they asked about David Cunliffe's plans. He had plans. It fitted in with, I guess what they were doing with John Key. In the end, I wasn't particularly fussed. It keeps the proportion of Parliament about right.
Mr Cunliffe says it's a straightforward arrangement.
No, it's not a dodgy, not at all. It's provided for in standing orders. That's exactly how the system is designed to work. It allows MPs some opportunities to realign their careers without the expense of a by-election.
The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says it's a jack-up.
Well, I think when you stand for Parliament, you should give your word. And the only reason why you would leave early is on a matter of principle to have a by-election to get a mandate.
The Greens co-leader James Shaw isn't bothered by the arrangement, but he's not so supportive of the lifelong payment for former Prime Ministers.
Well, look, the Green Party has had quite a long tradition of making a fairly clear stand against the kinds of perks that some MPs get.
John Key and David Cunliffe's electorate offices in Helensville and Newlyn will remain open and will be run by parliamentary service staff until new MPs are elected in September. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Let's go to the Auckland suburb of Gleneden now. In the torrential rains of the weekend, part of a 14-unit property block owned by the Wellpark Trust was submerged in up to a metre of water on Sunday. Some tenants in the block lost almost everything they had. None of those tenants we spoke to had any insurance. Floods happen, of course, and the landlord contacted us to say on Monday night that he didn't know the block was at greater risk of flooding. We were on air at the time, we received a statement from him, we ran it in good faith, but then we decided to check that for ourselves. And what we found directly contradicts it. Indeed, we've spoken to a former council stormwater engineer who tells us he warned the current landlord back in 2012 the property he was buying was at significant flood risk. And there's more. As Zach Fleming reports, Philip Davis was not only personally advised, it was also in the property's LIM report, and part of the building's concrete foundations have been replaced due to previous flood damage.
This is 4116 Great North Road in Glen Eden. Unbeknownst to Gobind and Shivani Juneja, last weekend's flash flooding wasn't the first time their ground level unit had flooded. The couple was out on Sunday when a record 65 millimetres of rain fell in just an hour. They returned home to find their furniture, car and scooter waterlogged beyond repair.
It's very bad for us, At the moment, we not afford to buy the new furniture, new car, new scooter and all those stuff.
The couple says they were not told their home was flood prone or that it had flooded previously in 2012, and they were uninsured. The property was purchased by the Wellpark Trust at the end of 2012, more than 6 months after it first flooded. On Monday, this is what its director, Philip Davis, had to say.
The owner of the property, Philip Davis, has just got in touch. He says he was not aware the property was a flood risk. He says the 2012 flooding was as a result of a blockage in the stormwater pipe, not a failure to cope with torrential rain, and he was not aware the pipe was, and I quote, a known hotspot. That's what the council's calling it. Mr Davis says he will warn all future tenants of the flood risk.
But that differs from a former Auckland Council staffer's version of events.
He would have been certainly advised by me, and I would imagine anybody else from council associated with it, that the property had significant flood issues associated with it.
Peter Kovacevic was a senior stormwater engineer at Auckland Council in 2012. He recalls advising Philip Davis about the stormwater issues before the trust's purchase.
My recollection is he contacted us about purchasing the property and what issues there would have been there.
And what did you tell him at the time?
Well, it would have been shown as being a major flood risk. Any limb would have shown that the property was a substantial flood risk. Possibly a property search may have uncovered more and actually identified the extent of it, but it would certainly have shown that the property was a major flood risk.
The Juneja's unit is one of 16 in the block owned by the Wellpark Trust. Until Sunday, they were paying $375 a week to live here. Gobind says he hasn't heard from Philip Davis or the property manager Michael Page since the flooding. Here's former council stormwater engineer Peter Kovacevic again. Do you personally remember informing Philip of the flood risk?
Well, I can recall I had a couple of discussions with him, and I'm pretty sure that it would have been most unlikely for me, knowing what I did about that, to have not confirmed it. Generally speaking, my practice of the day on those situations was either send them an email or, in fact, write a letter just setting out what the situation was and what could be expected by way of remedial works. So I'd be surprised if he didn't at least get an email, but it's possible that it was simply a conversation. But certainly in the conversation he'd have been advised there were major risks down there.
So, the stormwater engineer tasked with advising Philip Davis on the property's stormwater risks is confident there's no way Mr Davis could not have known the property was at a flood risk. Mr Davis himself has also said that the limb report that he requested before he bought the property did recognise that it was at a flood risk. In fact, Mr Kovacevic says that at the time in 2012, he recognised the property was at such a flood risk, one option he put forward to Auckland Council was that Council buy the property and redevelop it to fix the problem. The problem is a stormwater drain at the back of the property that runs underneath it, underneath Great North Road and underneath properties at the other side. The drain was installed in 1960 and its design makes it prone to blockages. It also can't handle large volumes of water. Philip Davis has been a real estate agent with Barfoot and Thompson since 1996 and owns several rental properties. He told me yesterday he was a responsible landlord and had never had any issues. But a former tenant disagrees. 11 years ago, Anissa Lanta took Philip Davis to the Tenancy Tribunal over the condition of a Morningside property owned by Mr Davis.
We ended up living with a bucket in the middle of our living room with water, coming down. So people would walk in, we'd have people come, be like, oh, watch the bucket, Nana, as she was coming in the house. There then progressed to be more holes in the main bathroom, in the covered area, on the deck outside. It got green, it got slimy, it got black mould. It went on for quite a long time, probably about a year. He's a really nice guy as our first, but after the third and fourth time of him saying, yeah, absolutely, you know, I'll have someone there tomorrow, I'd take the morning off work and no one would show up. And then, you know, just the smile didn't connect to what else was going on, you know. Yeah, he's a really nice person, and he's got the money to do the fixing. That wasn't the issue, he just didn't care enough.
She was awarded $1,200 compensation. And in 2013, Philip Davis was fined $6,000 by the Real Estate Agents Disciplinary Tribunal for misleading advertising, after he failed to inform a buyer a property had $15,000 in outstanding body corporate fees and an occupation time restriction. On appeal, that fine was reduced to $1,000. Lila Atutahi, Director of Tenancy Tribunal Consultancy Limited, says the tenants affected by the flooding at 4116 Great North Road may have recourse.
The landlord is responsible to ensure that the tenants are made aware of this potential risk of flooding, and advice should be given to the tenant to obtain contents insurance at the beginning of the tenancy. So in the circumstances where a landlord has not made them aware and happily moved them in there, knowingly know that there is a potential risk of flooding here, then there is possibly a breach of tenancy agreement here.
Philip Davis has refused repeated requests for an interview. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
And we would love to talk to Philip Davis about the timeline of the purchase of that property after some fairly heavy flooding 5 years ago, what the LIM report says, what he was told by the council employee, and what he knew about the likelihood or otherwise of it flooding, and whether he should have passed any information he had on to tenants. Mr. Davis, if you are listening, we'd love to talk to you. It's 22 minutes past 5. A company run by an Auckland cake decorator won a contract to upgrade 2 West Coast water treatment plants, despite having no experience in the sector. The Westland District Council has now put those contracts on hold as it investigates every contract issued in the past 3 years. The council itself is under investigation by the Serious Fraud Office, but the SFO won't give any details of what exactly it is looking into. Our Christchurch reporter Rachel Graham has more.
Techno Economic Services is registered to Auckland woman Niha Bubna, who also operates a cake decorating business in South Auckland. Niha Bubna is the sole director and shareholder of both companies. Last month, the Westland District Council awarded Techno Economic Services the contract to upgrade drinking water services in Whataroa and Kumara at a cost of $470,000. Mayor Bruce Smith says the council initially rejected the tender.
It was rejected on the basis that the party was unknown, and we requested substantial bonds and sureties to ensure that our ratepayers weren't exposed. It then came back to our January meeting where the company involved had agreed to put up a $100,000 bond and agreed to substantial retentions, and the contracts were let.
Mr. Smith says the company had no experience in water treatment plants in New Zealand or Australia, but the documents it provided to the tendering committee were impressive. Mr. Smith says he is aware of media reports that Techno Economic Services were awarded a $7 million contract to build a sewage plant in Franz Joseph, despite having no experience in that area. The Mayor says no contract was ever issued for that work, and the council no longer plans to build a sewage plant. Mr. Smith says because of concerns which have been raised, they are now looking at all contracts issued in the last 3 years under the council's asset manager Vivek Goel.
We're taking a precautionary approach and ensuring that we look under every stone to ensure that if in fact there is an issue, we know what it is. It's fair to say we haven't come across one yet, but we are looking.
Vivek Goel is currently on leave from the council. The former mayor, Mike Havel, says he's never heard of Techno Economic Services. He says the council had approved a study into the best option for Franz Joseph sewerage issues, but had got no further in the process before the new council decided to go for an oxidation pond instead. Mr. Havel says in his time at the council there was a formal procurement process which required projects to go out for public tender, and he expected that was followed. Niha Bubna was contacted for an interview, but she said she had no comment. Her South Auckland cake shop has been closed since last week. In Otatahi for Checkpoint, ko Rachel Graham, tēnei.
5:25, you're with Checkpoint. Coming up, a bill has been passed by Parliament giving the Whanganui River the same legal status as a person. And a New Zealander is at the centre of new accusations about conflicts of interest in President Trump's inner circle. That's coming up. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook, of course, and our email address is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We would love to hear from you about what rights tenants should have to be told about vulnerabilities in the properties they are renting. Right, a leaked tax return for US President Donald Trump shows he paid $38 million in tax on more than $150 million of income in 2005. Just 1 year. This is very strange. 2 pages of the tax return were revealed by US TV network MSNBC, triggering an angry response from the White House. How angry was it? Because this may, in fact, be flattering to Trump, who has consistently, it's been inferred, been seen as paying less than his fair share of tax. Now, the White House said publishing the tax return was illegal. Mr. Trump has consistently refused to release his tax information, saying he was under a tax audit. So where did this information come from, and why 2005? From Washington, Lorna Shattuck reports.
Traffic woes. Expectations at the start of Rachel Maddow's 9 p.m. show on Tuesday night after she posted an intriguing teaser on Twitter earlier in the day. We've got Trump tax returns tonight, 9 p.m. Seriously. Of course, Mr. Trump famously refused to release his tax returns throughout the election campaign, even though it's been a tradition for presidential candidates since Watergate. He claimed he couldn't because they were under audit, despite the fact the Internal Revenue Service here in the US says that doesn't prevent them being published. So, all eyes on the investigative financial journalist David K. Johnston, who appeared alongside Rachel Maddow after a long build-up to explain what he knew. 2 pages of Donald Trump's 2005 form had, he said, been sent to him anonymously in the post. A tiny part of what the complete return would have involved, but still, what did they say?
What's most important about this tax return, though, Rachel, is that under the regular tax system, remember we have 2 tax systems, well-to-do people, you and I, effectively calculate our tax twice, the regular tax system and the alternative minimum tax. If we didn't have the alternative minimum tax, and Donald Trump in writing wants to end the alternative minimum tax, he would have paid taxes at a lower rate than the bottom half of taxpayers, the poor in this country who make less than $33,000.
So, effectively, by claiming losses from previous years, Mr. Trump was able to save millions of dollars in taxes that he might otherwise have owed, paying a very low rate of tax altogether.
He paid 24%. You know who pays 24% in this country? Married couples with 2 incomes like my wife and I, who make about $400,000 a year. Donald Trump and his wife that year made $418,000 a day. And the point of this is the top in this country, people at the top, are not burdened the way we suggest.
It sounds a bit shocking, certainly, but what Mr. Johnston described Mr. Trump doing isn't a crime, and it certainly isn't the big scoop that Twitter might have led us to believe. The White House got ahead of the story before the show even aired, issuing a blunt statement criticising MSNBC for publishing the document, an act which it said was illegal. You know you are desperate for ratings, it said, when you're willing to violate the law to push a story about 2 pages of tax returns from a decade ago. Leaking federal tax returns is illegal, but MSNBC argues it's exercising its First Amendment rights to publish information in the public interest. And it's interesting that by releasing the statement, the White House did effectively indicate these documents are genuine. The administration then went on to add, though, that Mr. Trump, as a businessman, had a responsibility to pay no more tax than legally required, but did pay $38 million on more than $150 million in income in 2005. For Checkpoint, I'm Lorna Shattuck in New York.
On the day in which Donald Trump's 2005 tax return was made public, one expert has even said possibly as a result of a leak by Mr. Trump himself, a New Zealander is at the centre of new accusations about conflicts of interest in the president's inner circle. Chris Liddell was CEO of Carter Holt Harvey, then became CFO of Microsoft and Vice President of General Motors. He's now Director of Strategic Initiatives in the Trump White House, and in that capacity he attends meetings with the president or on the White House's behalf. Now, on January 23rd, according to an organisation we'll talk to shortly, Chris Liddell participated with Trump in meetings with business leaders from 12 companies, including 10 in which he allegedly held stock. Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW, have complained to White House counsel that in doing so, Chris Liddell, and I quote, may have broken criminal conflict of interest laws. That's the complaint. And it's been made by Crew under their executive director, a former federal corruption prosecutor named Noah Bookbinder.
Crew is asking the White House counsel, Don McGahn, to look into what appears to us to be strong evidence that Chris Liddell went to meetings with major leaders of corporations to discuss specific policy issues while he owned substantial amounts of stock in those corporations, and therefore stood potentially to benefit from some of the same kinds of policy changes that he was there to talk to them about. So we're asking the White House counsel to look into that and to determine whether the issue ought to be referred to the Department of Justice here, which would look into it if there, in fact, is a potential criminal violation.
Right, what Crew is saying specifically is that Chris Liddell participated in a meeting with Trump with business leaders from 12 companies, including 10 in which he appears to have held shares, right?
That's right. There actually were 3 different meetings, and so that there were 2 meetings with large numbers of companies and 1 meeting also with several automobile manufacturers, and that's one where there clearly appeared to be discussion of specific policy issues that could affect those companies in which Liddell appears to have owned stock at the time.
What's the value of the stock you think he holds in the companies he was meeting with?
Well, the value of the stock in all of the companies was over $2 million. The automobile manufacturers, where there appears to be the most specific evidence of conflicts, that was over $70,000 in stock. But in the larger meetings, the numbers were much higher, so more than $2 million.
What should Chris Liddell do according to the rules that govern the kinds of meetings that are taking place and the kind of participants that one might expect to be in those meetings? What should he have done? Should he have recused himself? Should he have disclosed? What is the expectation?
Well, there are several things that he could have done and should have done. The first is that he could have sold his stock. It appears that he took steps toward eventually doing that. We don't know actually whether he has sold the stock, but he went through a process with the White House that often is a precursor to selling stock, but that was after those meetings, so that wouldn't help him in this case. So that's one option. Another option is simply don't go to the meetings while you own the stock in companies that could be affected by the conversations at the meeting. And the final thing is that the government actually has a waiver process where you can say that you have interests, you're going to participate in a meeting anyway, and you're asking for permission to do so, to essentially waive the conflicts of interest. He does not appear to have gone through that process either. So there were a number of options that he had, and he does not seem to have exercised those options. Instead, he just plowed ahead and had these conversations that could have created a significant conflict because of the substantial shares of stock that he owned.
Right. You, Crew, have filed a complaint with White House counsel Donald McGahn. What happens now?
Well, what we are asking is for McGahn to review the facts. He knows more than we do about, in fact, the stock that Liddell owns. Everything that we see suggests that he still owned that stock at that time. McGahn can also determine exactly what was discussed in those meetings and whether there were specific issues that could be that could affect the companies in which McGahn owns stock. We have seen evidence that suggests that there were, but he can verify that. And if he determines that there was an actual violation of the conflict of interest law, which is a criminal law, that in other words, if Liddell worked on an issue in which he had a financial interest, then we've asked McGann to refer the case over to the Department of Justice, which is where there would be criminal prosecutors who would investigate and determine whether there are charges that ought to be filed.
That is Noah Bookbinder, who is the head of Cruise Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, talking to us earlier this afternoon, 24.5 to 6. Even by our standards, we're quite late. Known as Next with Business was first. Katrina Batten with the 24 minutes to 6 headlines.
Wellington College has announced the punishments for 2 boys who boasted on social media last week about having sex with drunk and unconscious girls. The boys have been suspended for 5 days, had their leadership responsibilities withdrawn and been barred from sports tournaments or cultural competitions. They'll also do community work and receive education about consent and healthy relationships. It's been revealed the landlord of badly flooded flats in Auckland was warned they were a significant flood risk when he bought the property. Ground floor units of the property were flooded for the second time in less than 5 years during Sunday's deluge. The landlord, Philip Davis, said earlier this week he had no idea the building was flood-prone, but a former council stormwater engineer has told Checkpoint he was warned in 2012 about the risk. The acting Prime Minister, Paula Bennett, says an agreement for John Key and David Cunliffe to leave Parliament before the parliamentary term ends was struck by the 2 MPs themselves. The former Prime Minister and his opponent at the last election will leave Parliament next month. Human remains found on Fox Glacier have been identified as a British tourist who was among 7 people killed in a helicopter crash in November 2015. The remains of Cynthia Charlton were found by a tramper earlier this month. The police confirmed the identity today after advising her family. The government has given into pressure from Māori and will reword legislation about where children at risk are sent. It's faced opposition over the proposed new law for child, youth and family, which puts safety above placing a child in state care with a member of their family or wider hapu. Parts of central Christchurch are cordoned off due to a gas leak. Police are asking motorists and pedestrians to avoid Durham and Litchfield streets. Contractors in the area have been advised by the police. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier beside me in the studio in Auckland, and the Auckland-based electricity lines and gas pipes company, Vector. Electricity lines and gas pipes company, that's what I said, isn't it?
That's right.
Is buying firms and on the lookout for more, Nona?
That's right. Yes, well, lines companies can't generate power, so that's all for, the big generation companies, the Genesis and Mercury and etc. So they can't compete there. But where they can compete is in providing services, sort of power types of services, like companies that provide solar heat pumps, heat pumps, solar energy, and we've got 2 companies that they bought for an undisclosed sum. One is Eco Products Group. They're the people that some people might be familiar with. They make those HRV products that people used to heat their homes and so on. And then another company called PowerSmart, which is all about solar energy. Now, that's just 2 companies that they've purchased. They want others like that. They think that, smart meters and that kind of thing that gives consumers more control over their power needs and so on is the way to go. Now, that's going to be really interesting for the retailers because that's the space they're going into.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to see some competition there. I mean, the idea was to keep the competition separate, but with convergence and so on, I suppose we're going to see some anyway.
And it sounds like Vector are trying to future-proof, right? As people,
well, sure.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, they've got the same need as any other company to drive shareholder value. And how do you do that? Well, you got to grow, right? So that's the story there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating week. Fairfax NZME this week, isn't it? We're going to get that decision.
No, it's been delayed.
Right. Okay. Okay.
It's been delayed.
Gosh,
it's been delayed till April. 11th. You weren't here that day. I told Rowan about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, but that's okay. We're not going to get that, but we are going to get the Federal Reserve in the U.S. are going to come up with their decision on interest rates later in the global day. And that's going to, well, it's already been priced in, and that's why we've seen our New Zealand dollar fall today, 69.3
So when you say
US
it's already
cents.
been priced in,
Yeah.
there is a full expectation that interest rates are going up. The Fed is pushing the interest rates up.
Look, I was checking out our global report. It's a 90% certainty.
Right. These are the same people who predicted a Clinton presidency and that Brexit wouldn't happen, right? These are the same.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, right.
Yes, they could be different. But what's more interesting is not so much what happens later today in terms of what happens with interest rates. And most people are expecting that to go up about a quarter of a percentage point to 0.75%. Okay. What's more interesting is what the schedule is for the year ahead. So how many interest rate hikes? Okay, so our dollar right now is sitting at 69.3 US cents, and that's kind of like reflecting the idea that interest rates are going up in the United States. 91.5 Australian and 57 pence. And our top 50 index, well, it's down nearly 2/3%, down 46 points to 7,131.
Nona Peltier, our business reporter here in Auckland. Thanks, Nona. A bill has been passed by Parliament which will give the Whanganui River the same legal status as a person. It will be the first river in the world to have such a status. The Whanganui River Claims Settlement Bill passed its final reading in Parliament today, ending the longest running litigation in New Zealand history. Te Manu Korahi reporter Shannon Haunui-Thompson has more.
There's a common saying in Whanganui, ko au te awa, ko te awa, ko au. I am the river and the river is me. And now the saying has been legally recognised, with the Whanganui River being given the same recognition and rights as a person. Adrian Rurafe, the MP for Te Tai Hauauru, says some may find the concept odd, but it's completely normal for Māori.
The river as a whole is absolutely important to the people who are from the river and live on the river, and so I think I'll repeat something that Chester Borrow said in the House today. It's not that we've changed as our worldview, but people are catching up to seeing things the way that we see it.
The Minister for Treaty of Waitangi Negotiations, Chris Finlayson, says this will work like a charitable trust or an incorporated society.
There are some precedents for it overseas. There's been a lot of talk that this is actually a very good way of ensuring that the particular resource is able to have representatives to address the kind of environmental degradation that so many natural resources suffer from.
Mr Rurafe says Māori have been fighting for more than 160 years to get this recognition for their river.
From a Whanganui viewpoint, the well-being of the river is directly linked to the well-being of the people, and so it's really important that that's recognised as its own identity.
The settlement includes financial redress of $80 million, as well as an additional $1 million contribution towards establishing the legal framework for the Whanganui River. The Crown will also contribute $30 million towards a contestable fund to help look after the health of the river. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Shannon Haunui-Thompson, aho.
17 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. A rural Waikato town that's been forced to go into lockdown mode after hours is demanding a return to 24/7 policing. Waipa's district mayor says crime levels are rising in Cambridge, yet the nearest fully operating station is Te Awamutu, and even that is not entirely reliable. Our police reporter Carla Penman has the story.
Dave Wilkinson, who owns the Challenge Rock gas service station in Cambridge, has installed up to 20 CCTV cameras after being burgled twice in 10 months. He says the most recent one was in July last year.
About 4:30 in the morning, after police and the security had gone home, so the town was completely unattended. They drove through my doors with a stolen motor car. They took about $3,500 worth of tobacco, but they did about $7,000 worth of damage to the building with the door mechanism.
He says in that case it was only by chance that Te Awamutu police did a sporadic patrol that night, as they had the night off. Since then, it's up to voluntary community groups to patrol at night.
The cops don't care. They're looking at numbers, they're looking at costs, they're not looking at service.
And if we treated our customers the way the police treat us, we wouldn't have businesses.
Mr Wilkinson says other local businesses are fearful after a spate of ram raids around town and the poor police response. He says it's ironic that more than 70 police officers live in Cambridge but work in other centres.
It's been around. The fire chief was mentioning 73. There's 3 members of the Cambridge Volunteer Fire Brigade are serving police officers now. 2 of them are in Hamilton and one's in Tiamutu. That's where they're stationed.
He says just last week a drunk driver crashed into a logging truck about 5 o'clock in the morning just south of Cambridge.
And there was no police patrol to come to monitor that job. The fire service did traffic control until the commercial vehicle unit got there, and that was the senior sergeant from Tiamutu that came over.
The Cambridge Volunteer Fire Brigade's Chief Officer, Don Garand, has confirmed to RNZ News they waited for 30 minutes that day for the police to arrive, and issues such as this happen sometimes on early mornings. The Waipa District Mayor Jim Milchrist says the community doesn't feel safe anymore and shopkeepers are having to take extreme security measures.
And looking at putting bollards and things like that in the footpath to stop vehicles driving through their shop window. And another effort is to put these horrible metal shutters on the front of their shops when they close at night. And nobody wants a community that looks like Soweto, to be honest.
He says the closest 24-hour station in Te Awamutu covers a very large area, and depending on the calls coming in, it could easily take police 40 minutes to an hour to respond to call-outs in Cambridge. Mr Milchrist says the reliance on voluntary patrol groups at night is unacceptable.
We've got people out driving around all night trying to keep tabs on vandalism and those sort of minor breaches of the peace. They can't do anything other than report it to the police, but at least there is some presence out there. But the acceptance that those are necessary means that the police are really not performing the function that we all expect.
He says the only way to reassure the shaken community would be to revert back to a manned station, or at least come to some sort of compromise. In a statement, the police in Waikato say there are frontline staff in Cambridge and the wider area available to the community 24/7. He says having more officers mobile ensures a quicker response in emergency situations. The Police Minister, Paula Bennett, says some of the extra 880 sworn officers promised by 2021 will be sent to Cambridge.
Of the 880, they will be spread throughout New Zealand. As part of it, there are about 140, I think from memory, that are specifically for rural, but even part of the 500 frontline will also be spread throughout New Zealand, completely operational as to where those police go.
She says she's heard the move to a centralised system of policing is indeed working. For Checkpoint, ko Carla Penman tēnei.
12 after 6. The government has bowed to pressure from Māori and will go back to the drawing board and reword controversial child protection legislation. It has faced a major pushback over parts of its proposed new child, youth and family law. Here is our political reporter, May Herring.
The bill is part of a major overhaul of child, youth and family as it becomes the Ministry for Vulnerable Children, o Rangatamariki. The changes have upset Māori, and the Minister in charge, Anne Tolley, has spent the last few weeks visiting iwi around the country and talking to the Māori Party. She says though the safety of the child remains a priority, it's clear the wording isn't right.
Look, the best place for any child is with their family. If that's at all possible and it's safe and it's in the child's long-term best interest, then of course we want them with their family. So we've tried to nuance that. I think clearly that we've nuanced it too much, and we're in discussions about how we might ease some of the fears from people.
Mrs Tolley says going back to the drawing board is part of the parliamentary process.
Well, that's the process of a select committee. I mean, that's the purpose of having the submission, so that you get a lot of other people having a look at it and giving you some opinions on what they think is reasonable and what isn't.
This morning, MPs heard submissions on the bill. The Children's Commissioner, Andrew Beecroft, says there were many reasons why the old legislation failed children in care, but wording wasn't one of them.
In our view, those placements have been badly supported. Placement decisions have been suboptimal and poor. In fact, you could say substandard and shoddy social work. There has been too much dump and run for Māori young people.
UNICEF also raised concerns about the bill. It says the government is shirking its responsibility by sneaking in a liability disclaimer. Under the proposed changes, the Crown will not be liable for actions of others, but UNICEF says the bill doesn't say if others include organisations hired by the government. The agency's child rights advocate Prudence Stone says it's even more of a concern given what's emerged recently about historic abuse in state care.
We don't want to argue over this like we did with leaky homes, years and years debating over who is responsible. These are vulnerable children in the care of the state. The buck stops with the state.
The government says it isn't trying to weasel out of any accountability, but the Crown can't be liable for the actions of third parties, and this clause is standard across most legislation. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
A serious mistake in an NCEA maths exam last year was a late addition to the paper, and NZQA's response to it may have robbed some students of excellence grades. An independent review published today says the error was in a question that was included in the Level 3 stats exam, too late to be checked independently. It says the Qualification Authority's decision to ignore students' attempts to answer the affected question could have disadvantaged some of the students. Our education correspondent, John Gerritsen, filed this report.
The review panel says NZQA could have marked students' attempts at the question, but it opted not to do that and altered its marking schedule for the exam. The panel says that certainly advantaged some students, but could have disadvantaged others. The head of maths at Wellington Girls College, Margaret Priest, says some of her pupils definitely missed out on excellence endorsements because of that decision.
I've just looked briefly at my own students' results, and I can see that there are about 15, 16 students that I would have expected would have got excellence in that exam and haven't, and it has actually cost them an excellence endorsement.
The panel recommends NZQA extend the mid-February deadline for reconsidering students' papers and also consider allowing derived grades based on students' work earlier in the year. NZQA chose not to do that, but Margaret Priest says it should have.
It is unfair, and I really feel very strongly that NZQA should take the panel's advice and extend that deadline for the reconsiderations or allow a derived grade.
Jake Wills is the co-head of maths at Kapiti College. He says the error probably cost one of his students a merit endorsement. However, he says whatever decision NZQA made about marking would have had some sort of knock-on effect.
There are always going to be some students that are disadvantaged, and so NZQA has done their very best to ensure that no students will be disadvantaged in the future, and also that any student who feels like they're unfairly disadvantaged is able to send their paper back in for reconsideration.
The review says no one person was responsible for the mistake or for 4 other more minor errors in last year's maths exams. Jake Wills says he accepts the real problem was with the exam setting process and rules, rather than with an examiner or question setter.
No person's ever going to be able to set a perfect exam every time, so I don't think it should necessarily be a black mark against all of the people involved, because it was a large number of people involved across many different roles. If that last step is that someone sits down and does the paper, those errors shouldn't be occurring.
The Qualifications Authority's Deputy Chief Executive for Assessment, Christine Kilkelly, says it will adopt the panel's recommendations to improve quality control.
The students' ability to do well in that exam, to demonstrate the very best of their skill, is what's paramount to us. So we will implement those changes fully, and I believe they will have a huge impact on ensuring that we don't have an error like this again.
Christine Kilkelly says from now on, even late changes to exams will be checked independently. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
A councillor says the Ministry of Health should decide whether fluoride is put into water, as DHBs are ill-equipped to deal with the arguments for and against it. MPs have heard a wide range of views today about the government's plan to shift responsibility from fluoridating water from councils to DHBs. Here's our health correspondent, Karen Brown.
The Health Select Committee is considering a bill that would shift responsibility for deciding whether community water supplies are fluoridated or not from local councils to individual DHBs. The Hutt City Mayor, Ray Marshall, said his council backs the plan, but added that DHBs must listen to communities and allow some to remain fluoride-free if that's what they want.
Where there is to be a change, we would ask that you look to give
the DHB the opportunity and something of an obligation to consult with the community in those areas where it means that there will be change.
He said the cost of fluoridating supplies could also be high for some communities, and in that situation, the DHB should pay.
For the smaller authorities that may not currently fluoridate, that could be a substantial cost on the ratepayer, and that's where we believe the District Health Board should pay for that cost if there is to be major change.
The head of public health at Waikato DHB, Felicity Dumble, said it backs the bill but doesn't want to have to consult over the issue. She explained to RNZ later consultation allows too much scope for the spreading of misinformation.
It's important that fluoridation is seen as a health initiative to improve oral health and reduce inequity, and DHBs have the expertise, medical and dental, that they can be advised to make a sound decision for the benefit of the community.
Dave McPherson, chair of the Hamilton City Council Growth and Infrastructure Committee, also questioned whether DHBs can handle the pressures posed by divisions over fluoridation.
There are huge community expectations for consultation on this issue from both sides, and DHBs are most definitely not set up to handle genuine consultation.
He said DHBs would spend time managing debate rather than providing health advice and services. He believed the Ministry of Health should make the decision rather than DHBs. A long-time Hawke's Bay dentist, David Marshall, said fluoridation's been a poison chalice for local bodies.
District health boards do have the medical, dental and public health experience and knowledge to examine the need for community fluoridation in their respective areas. Local authorities do not, and so are frequently subject to the pressures of vocal minorities.
But a resident of Featherston in the Wairarapa, homeopath Claire Bleakley, said fluoride's not wanted in water, whoever's in charge.
One of the biggest concerns I have about widespread fluoride in our drinking water is there will be no choice for people like me to find a place to live where there is no fluoride, as I am very fluoride sensitive.
Another submitter, Michael Woods, had a similar view.
And the Ministry of Health are not actually protecting the health of the population, they're protecting this outdated, illegal experiment, because that's what it was. When it started off in the 1940s, it was an illegal experiment.
The Select Committee says all those who've made a submission will have the chance to present it over coming weeks. For Checkpoint, Karen Brown.
We go now to a story we've all seen. South Korean expert Professor Robert Cowley talking to the BBC via Skype. His kids wander in, his wife comes to get the kids. Whoops-a-daisy, internet sensation. Here's the BBC revisiting to discuss their fame.
Let's discuss this further then with Robert Kelly, Assistant Professor at the Department of Political Science.
It began as so many BBC interviews do. An international news story, a presenter and an expert to explain what was going on. What happened next? Well, no one could have predicted that.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
Professor Robert Kelly. Last Thursday, he was an expert on South Korean politics. By Friday, an internet superstar. During his live interview on the impeachment of the South Korean president, his wife, Jung Ah-kim, and two young children, Marion and James, moved in to steal the show. But what was an innocent TV blooper quickly turned into a social media sensation. People raced to Twitter, YouTube and Facebook to share the moment. Speaking to me for the first time since the incident, I asked Professor Kelly, Bob and his family what life had been like since they went viral.
It's been pretty unreal. We didn't really expect any kind of attention like this at all. We certainly never had anything like this in our life before. It got to the point where we had to turn off the phones and Facebook and Twitter and all that sort of stuff.
Jung-ah told us she'd been busy recording Bob while he was live on the TV. And that's why the children were able to make a break for their dad's study and why she flew in with such speed. But one focus of the social media storm and the subsequent news coverage soon became the mistaken assumption that the woman launching herself into shot was the children's nanny.
Yeah, we were pretty uncomfortable with it.
It's just that we did not argue about any of those, and also so we are just. I hope people just enjoy it, not argue over this thing.
A normal family living a normal life. now turned online legends. I asked Bob if things had calmed down at all since our last encounter.
Yeah, I went to work today. That was nice. I don't turn off my phone quite as much as I used to.
There was one nice suggestion sent to me on social media, which is that you should buy Chung Ha a spa day for everything she did in that video.
Yeah, that's certainly true. My wife deserves a medal for taking care of us and taking care of our family. That's absolutely true.
It just goes to show that anything can happen on live TV, or perhaps that, as the saying goes, never work with animals or children.
James Menendez from the BBC. 16 million YouTube viewings.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. Wellington College has announced the punishments for 2 boys who boasted on social media last week about having sex with drunk and unconscious girls. The boys have also made a public statement apologising for their actions. Emil Donovan reports.
Both boys have been suspended for 5 days, had their leadership responsibilities withdrawn and been barred from sports tournaments or cultural competitions. They will also do community work over the next few months and receive education about consent and healthy relationships. The Board of Trustees made the decision about the punishment after consulting a report prepared by a disciplinary committee earlier this week. In a statement, the board says it will work with parents to improve its educational programs about relationships and sexual consent. The boys also apologised, saying that they deeply regret their actions and had learned a lot over the past week. This is Emil Donovan.
A New Zealander is at the centre of new accusations about conflicts of interest in President Donald Trump's inner circle. Chris Liddell has been chief executive of Carter Holt Harvey, as well as holding senior positions at Microsoft and General Motors. He's currently director of strategic initiatives in the White House and one of the president's closest aides. A Washington lobby group has complained to the White House after Mr. Liddell attended meetings with the president with leaders from 10 companies he holds stock in. Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington's executive director, Noah Bookbinder, says that seems an obvious conflict of interest.
That's one where there clearly appeared to be discussion of specific policy issues that could affect those companies in which Liddell appears to have owned stock at the time.
Noah Bookbinder says Chris Liddell appears to have taken steps to divest himself of his shares, but not until after the meetings. It's been revealed an Auckland landlord knew his block of flats had a significant flood risk, but didn't warn his tenants. For the second time in less than 5 years, 6 ground floor units of the Glen Eden property were deluged by more than a metre of water during Sunday's downpour. Philip Davis, director of the Well Park Trust, which owns the property, said earlier this week he had no idea the building was flood-prone. But a former Auckland Council stormwater engineer, Peter Kovacevic, told Checkpoint he warned Mr Davis about the risk before Mr Davis bought the property.
He would have been certainly advised by me, and I would imagine anybody else from council associated with it, that the property had significant flood issues associated with it.
Peter Kovacevic says the LIM report also shows the property was flood-prone. The government has given in to pressure from Māori and will reword legislation about where children at risk are sent. It's faced a lot of opposition over the proposed new law for child, youth and family, which puts safety above placing a child in state care with a member of their family or wider hapu. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
Māori leaders, including the former government minister Tariana Turia, have been outspoken against the changes. She says the effects of Māori children not being part of their whānau, hapu and iwi are huge. The Minister in charge, Anne Tolley, has spent the last few weeks visiting iwi around the country and says though the safety of the child remains a priority, it's clear the wording isn't right. She says going back to the drawing board is part of the parliamentary process. The bill is part of a major overhaul of child, youth and family as it becomes the Ministry for Vulnerable Children, Oranga Tamariki. From Parliament, May Heron.
The acting Prime Minister, Paula Bennett, says an agreement for John Key and David Cunliffe to leave Parliament before the parliamentary term ends was struck by the 2 MPs. The former Prime Minister and his opponent at the last election will leave Parliament next month. They're also leaving close enough to the general election to avoid forcing by-elections in their respective Auckland electorates. Mrs Bennett says the timing of the departure was agreed between themselves.
Good on them, they're able to, but as I say, from my understanding, and Prime Minister's in the air at the moment, but from my understanding is that he certainly wasn't actively involved in those discussions.
Paula Bennett. As with previous Prime Ministers, Mr Key will receive a lifetime allowance of just over $51,000 a year. Human remains found on Fox Glacier have been identified as a British tourist who was among 7 people killed in a helicopter crash on the glacier in November 2015. The remains of Cynthia Charlton from Hampshire were found by a tramper earlier this month. The police confirmed her identity today after advising her family. It's 6:05. To sport, and the Warriors skipper Roger Tuivasa-Sheck has failed to recover from a concussion he suffered against Melbourne last week and won't play against the Canterbury Bulldogs in their NRL match in Dunedin on Friday. Tuivasa-Sheck suffered a head knock late in the first half of the Warriors' 26-10 loss. Former captain Ryan Hoffman will lead the side. England are trying to lure the All Blacks to Twickenham for a November test, according to a British media report. England will surpass the All Blacks' world record of 18 successive test victories if they beat Ireland this weekend, but they're currently not scheduled to play Steve Hanson's side until November 2018. The Daily Mail is reporting that England Rugby Chief Executive Ian Ritchie is trying to organise a test which would replace the All Blacks' scheduled end-of-year match against the Barbarians at Twickenham. Pace bowler Tim Southee has been quick to put his hand up for the vacant first slip position heading into tomorrow's second cricket test against South Africa in Wellington. New Zealand are without injured veterans Ross Taylor and Trent Boult, leaving them light on experience, with the pair boasting more than 130 test caps between them. With Taylor out, it also leaves a vacancy in the slip cordon, which Southee's happy to fill.
We've done plenty of slip catching over the last couple of days. But it is something I enjoy. It's a lot nicer than running from fine leg to fine leg when there's a left-hand, right-hand batsman in at the crease, that's for sure.
Tim Southee. That's the news.
Traffic woes.
The noise of the traffic going through Katikati is just incessant. You cannot have a curbside conversation because of the traffic going through.
Business struggles.
We're bleeding money. We're absolutely bleeding money. Our family savings are invested in this. Our family is separated and our business is at risk also.
Stolen honey.
It's really getting to the stage now where it's threatening the economy and also the livelihood of the apiarists around the country.
The Sweet Spot. Susie Ferguson and Guy Espin, a morning report weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, advocates for the Wellington Safe House helping migrant victims of family violence say they're at capacity and need more funding. And after 10, theoretical physicist Lawrence Krauss on why we're all here and how humanity has reached its current understanding of the universe. Join me, Lynn Freeman, in for Catherine Ryan after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula fine today. Cloudy periods increasing tomorrow afternoon and a few light showers developing in Northland tomorrow evening. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumaranui, Taupo and Bay of Plenty fine. Taranaki to Wellington, also Taihape, fine breaks increasing. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay cloudy with showers easing tonight and clearing tomorrow evening. Wairarapa mostly cloudy today, fine breaks increasing tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury fine, Bulla to Fiordland, also Otago and Southland fine, apart from cloudy periods tomorrow morning and evening. And the Chatham Islands mostly cloudy today, fine breaks increasing tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina, and thank you everyone for being with us. You'll remember West Auckland was hit by a deluge at the weekend, with several properties and roads submerged by several metres of water after record rainfall in just 1 hour. In Gleneden, a 16-unit property was badly affected when a stormwater drain in its rear simply couldn't handle the downpour. The families living inside 6 of the ground floor units have lost basically everything. Many are new immigrants. None of the people we spoke to had any kind of insurance. But it wasn't the first time that property had flooded. In 2012, the exact same thing happened and was sold to Wellpark Trust 3 months later. A building consent document shows $19,000 was spent reconstructing a flood-damaged concrete floor. The Trust Director, Philip Davis, told Checkpoint on Monday he had no idea his property was flood-prone, but would inform new tenants from then on that it was. We accepted that at face value, and then we started to do our own inquiries, and they have revealed that not only did the LIM report list the property as a flood risk, Philip Davis was personally informed of that fact. Former Auckland Council stormwater engineer Peter Kovacevic told our reporter Zach Fleming he remembers speaking to Mr Davis back in 2012.
Do you personally remember informing Philip of the flood risk?
Well, I can recall I had a couple of discussions with him, and I'm pretty sure that it would have been most unlikely for me, knowing what I did about that, to have not confirmed it. Generally speaking, my practice of the day on those situations was either send them an email or, in fact, write a letter just setting out what the situation was and what could be expected by way of remedial works. So I'd be surprised if he didn't at least get an email, but it's possible that it was simply a conversation. But certainly in the conversation he'd have been advised there were major risks down there.
This is confusing to us because that contradicts what we were told by Mr Davis himself on Monday night. Zach Fleming has been out at the property this afternoon to see what remedial work is being done at the site by the Wellpark Trust. Zach, what does it look like out there?
John, it's been 3 days since these floods hit on Sunday, and a contractor hired by the landlord to get rid of the carpets has only just arrived now, late this afternoon. The insides of these units absolutely stink because they've been left sopping wet for 3 days now. The people who live here that I spoke to say they feel absolutely abandoned by the property owner, which is the Wellpark Trust. They haven't heard from anybody from the trust, not the director of the trust, Philip Davis, or the appointed property manager, Michael Page. Michael Page hasn't returned any of their calls, and some of the tenants I spoke to say they've left several messages with him. The saving grace actually for them here has been Auckland Council. The council are here at the moment helping all of the tenants remove their belongings from the property and store them somewhere else in a safe place. Hopefully they can salvage some of them. There are actually even some people from the Auckland Council's cemeteries unit here helping them out. So Auckland Council is obviously mobilising as many people as they can to help them. Council has also offered to put these people up in emergency accommodation for as long as they need to, until the property owner can sort their accommodation out for them, until it dries out. One of the women I spoke to from the cemeteries unit rolled her eyes at me when I asked her, why are you guys here helping out as opposed to the landlord? She said that's a really valid question, especially considering that Philip Davis knew that this property was at a risk of flooding. The property has now flooded and the people who live here have lost everything, but now Philip Davis and the Wellpark Trust aren't helping them out.
Zach Fleming from the building. We'd love to talk to Mr Davis about what he knew about how flood prone that building was and his obligations and responsibility to his tenants, both as they were moving in to inform them of the flood risk and now the flooding has happened. Mr Davis, if you're there, please do call in. Earlier in Checkpoint, we heard about the accusations of conflict of interest being made against New Zealander and Trump advisor Chris Liddell. Accusations have just been made, nothing has been proven. Another New Zealander is also in the spotlight in Washington. This is Peter Thiel, who, unlike Chris Liddell, wasn't born here, but applied for New Zealand citizenship in early 2011 and had his application approved by, and I quote, ministerial decision. In the US, where he does still spend much of his time, he's a controversial figure. Protesters have even gathered outside his San Francisco home to voice their disapproval of his role in facilitating President Trump's plans for mass deportation of illegal immigrants, even those who've lived and worked in America for many years. The New Yorker's coverage of the protest reported it was in response to a software program developed by Peter Thiel's company, Palantir Technologies, for the Department of Homeland Security, potentially being used to facilitate and expedite the work of immigration and customs enforcement. In other words, helping to make those deportations happen. Now, David Campos is a lawyer, a former member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and an immigrant himself who arrived in America in 1985. He attended the protest outside Mr. Thiel's $30 million home, along with 50 other tech workers, attorneys, and anti-surveillance experts. I asked him why they were there.
Here you have an individual who lives in San Francisco, who is a resident of San Francisco, who is playing a very important role in what we believe is a very grave injustice. This is an individual who is using his company, Palantir, and the technology that this company is developing for the federal government to essentially expedite the mass deportation of millions of people. And in so doing, he is helping to deprive millions of people here in the United States of the due process that is accorded to them under the Constitution of the United States. And, you know, as San Franciscans, we have an obligation to call out injustice, and the fact that another San Franciscan, in this case Peter Thiel, is a part of that injustice is important. And we want people to know about the actions of this individual, because it is really sad and shameful that this billionaire is choosing to enrich himself, because they are getting tens of millions of dollars from the federal government, enrich himself by essentially helping to expedite the mass deportation of millions of people, including, you know, entire families.
Right. How much of this is theoretical and hypothetical, and how much of this is known? We know that Palantir has had relationships with the NSA and the CIA. We know that it has received government contracts, and we know that Peter Thiel is an advisor to Donald Trump. Beyond that, is this extrapolation? In other words, in terms of his role in what you describe as the mass deportation, how much of that is a statement of fact, and how much of that is you hypothesizing?
Well, I mean, look, I cannot, or anyone for that matter, can tell you precisely what Peter Thiel has done in terms of the development of this data and of this software. But we know that they have received a contract to do that, you know, to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. And part of the challenge here is that there is a veil of secrecy. There is all of this is happening behind closed doors, and that's actually what makes it so dangerous. That we don't really know the extent or the scope of what they're doing. And while right now the focus of what they're doing appears to be on the mass deportation of millions of people, presumably this is data, information, software that could be used by the federal government for other purposes that go beyond targeting immigrants here, but actually other members of our country. And that's what's so dangerous about what this individual is doing. And because it's happening behind closed doors, there's obviously no accountability, which is why for us it's important to shed light on the actions.
Can we shine light on the specifics? And particularly what Palantir is actually doing? What is actually known? Now, The Intercept reported at the end of last year, and I have, in fact, the Vanity Fair version of the article on the screen in front of me, so this has gone thoroughly mainstream in the US, that Palantir received a $34 million contract to work with US Immigration and Customs Enforcement to build an intelligence and database system called Falcon. What is it that Falcon does?
What it does is that it identifies an entire category of people, and that category of people has been expanded manyfold. That would include millions of people who, until Trump became president, would not be subject to deportation, because until recently, the Obama administration has essentially, focused its efforts on people who engage in criminal activity, who have been found guilty of a crime. That scope has been expanded, and Falcon presumably would allow the Department of Homeland Security, as that scope has been expanded, to target millions of people because of any kind of interaction that they may have had with any local government or the federal government, for that matter.
David Campbell was talking about the business of New Zealand citizen Peter Thiel. The Ministry for Primary Industries has visited the premises of the egg producers at the Centre of Serious Fraud Office investigations this afternoon. Palace Poultry is under investigation by the SFO for labelling caged eggs as free range, whether it did or not. In other words, a spokesperson from MPI says it wanted to verify Palace Poultry's production and animal welfare status. MPI last formally ordered the property just over 2 weeks ago, but was only advised of the SFO investigation on Monday. Now, the founder of Palace Eggs, Terry Fletcher, says they've begun collecting their eggs back from Countdown supermarkets where they've been removed from the shelves. The general area of food fraud, and obviously this hasn't been proved here, is growing. Dr. Helen Darling, the Executive Director of the Asia Pacific Centre for Food Integrity, says selling caged eggs as free-ranged is not unsafe, but it is offensive. A more offensive example, labelling meat as halal when it's not halal. I asked Dr. Darling how widespread this kind of food mislabelling is.
It is actually extremely widespread, but it varies. So you have two kind of types of food fraud in essence. You have the food fraud where a kiwi fruit might be labelled as from a different producer than it actually is, but it's still a kiwi fruit and it's not going to kill you. And then you have, hopefully not going to, and then you have something like infant formula, which can actually have catastrophic effects if it is a fraudulent product or it's been adulterated in any way. So there's a couple of different types of fraud, and it does depend on where in the supply chain you're purchasing and what control you have over that supply chain.
Can we look at some examples of food fraud? And the one that you were bringing to the attention of our producer Bridget Burke was the selling of food as halal when in fact it wasn't. So there is no risk to people's safety, but in fact people who thought they were eating halal and weren't would be extremely upset about that fraud.
Exactly, and so again that's something where you have relied on the producer or the retailer to label something that for your purposes, for your beliefs it is safe, and actually it turns out to be unsafe. So that's a significant issue, and it crops up a lot around halal foods, in particular around kosher foods, around even around free-range and organics. People who are making purchasing decisions based on their own ethical or moral values and are being misled, it does impact on how you obviously your level of trust in the supply chain. So fraud is quite widespread. It's very difficult to actually quantify it because it can only be quantified where cases have been found out. So we can speculate how prevalent it is. But just looking at recent examples, there was a case in Australia last year or the year before last about oregano, which was, I think they found that 70% of the products that they tested weren't actually pure. Honey is another good example. It's frequently adulterated overseas, mislabeled as of the floral type or origin of the honey. Meat is commonly mislabeled as well. So it is a very sort of unfortunately prevalent practice, it appears.
How do you mislabel meat? So if I have been defrauded by somebody telling me meat isn't what I thought it was, what is the way that that's most likely to happen?
I guess, if you take sort of beef, for example, if somebody tells you that it's Angus and it's not. So, that's a very simple example. Again, it's unlikely to kill you, but it might alter your quality experience of that product, or you have paid an extra, $10 a kilo.
Yeah, that's the key point, isn't it? And to pick up on that. Yep. So people pay more for Angus, which is probably brilliant marketing by somebody because beef is beef is beef, right? Although I know we're going to hear from Angus farmers now. But so you pay more for Angus because someone's done a great job on the marketing front and you're not getting Angus, you're being ripped off. You pay more for free range because you believe in animal welfare and you're not getting free range, you're still getting eggs. So in fact, is it usually around profit motives? In other words, is the fraud because you can get more money by telling someone they're purchasing something better, more desirable, more ethical than they actually are?
Generally it is around economic motivation. There are also sort of cases of deliberate and malicious tampering, which fortunately is not as common, but it still does happen. But most of the fraud is motivated by economic means or supply means, which again falls back to the dollar. But I don't have enough eggs, therefore I go and secure eggs from another source and sell them as my own to meet my own supply contracts.
Dr. Helen Darling. Of course, Angus is delicious and worth every cent you pay for it, just to preempt the emails. Here's something lovely. A Dunedin University student is spending 16 weeks couch surfing in a bid to raise enough money for a scholarship for someone less fortunate. Tiana Fratelli, a fourth-year law and sociology student, will spend this semester sleeping on couches or mattresses in the flats of strangers. The hope is to raise around $4,000 by saving the money she would have otherwise spent on rent and thereby creating a scholarship for someone else. We sent our reporter Ian Telford to meet Tiana to find out how she would spend tonight, where she would spend tonight, and how she came up with the idea.
It was just an idea as a backup for a friend who didn't have anywhere sussed for the following year to flat. And we're like, oh, just come stay with us for a week. And then we've just thought about it and we're like, if you did that consecutively over the course of a semester, you could actually, save a lot of money and do a pretty cool fundraising. So.
And from there you thought, I should do that?
Yeah, well, it was kind of in the back burner. That was in first year. So I was like, get into the swing of things first. And then now in fourth year, I was like, oh, we'll give it a go.
And your idea is to raise money for, what, other people?
Well, yeah, the idea is just that you can't, students really want to donate. People are really generous, but you just don't really have the budget to donate. But people are always able to give you somewhere to sleep or, just put one more person into dinner, essentially. And so it just saves a lot of money that way. And then, yeah, we struggled to think of what to do with the fundraising, but then we decided that a scholarship would be the best way to basically go from the students back immediately to a student. So. And
you've called this a good sort. So what's a good sort?
I need to, work out the logistics of the criteria for the scholarship, but essentially just someone who wants to get involved, someone, it's nomination based, so hopefully people will nominate their friends or, someone who they think deserves it, someone who's really involved with the community and, basically loves Dunedin and wants to come.
So you think you want to help someone else who wouldn't otherwise be able to come to Otago?
Yeah, who might be struggling. There's a lot of scholarships for academic excellence and that type of thing. But just someone who wants to come, wants to get involved, and might not otherwise be able to afford rent or expenses.
Now we're sitting on the actual bed, yeah, for this week.
Yep. This is my bed for this week.
How is it? Is it comfortable?
It is quite comfy. I can't complain.
We're in the lounge room, and this is what, your fourth or fifth?
Fourth week, yeah.
So how's it going? What's the reaction been?
I've been really blown away, to be honest. It's going really well. Everyone's just been so friendly and have just completely accepted me into their flat straight away, which, to be honest, I was expecting. This is why I knew it would work, because that's what Dunedin flats are like. Everyone just very open, very accepting, and it's just been lots of fun so far.
But you have to sleep a different place every week.
Yeah.
And you have to sleep with people you don't know. I mean, is this really that good?
Yeah, it might be a bit tough, but for now it's good. Hopefully I'll get into a routine. And yeah, everyone's just been really nice. I have known the people I've stayed with so far, or at least a little bit. And so it'll be interesting when I don't know anyone in the flat, but it'll be an experience.
When you get down to the random flatties.
Yeah, when scraping the barrel, but...
Yeah, but people are embracing this. Is there problems, though, you have to find somewhere to study, for instance?
Yeah, but the library's always open. I tend to study at the library anyway, because Dunedin flats tend to get a bit too cold to study in your room. So I'm quite used to studying at the library, so that won't change, really.
And have you had good flats and bad flats already?
I think they'll be watching. I can't.
They might. But, I mean, is it going to be variable, do you think?
I think there will be a bit of a change up. Yeah, there's... for instance, I'm going to a Hyde Street flat for Hyde Street, the party in a couple of weeks, and so that could be interesting. But I think there'll be a bit of a range. I think it'll be quite interesting to see, to test out a whole lot of different flats and a whole lot of different areas and kind of see which ones, it'll be interesting to see the variety, I think.
Is it catching people's imagination, this thing?
I think so. I think the funny thing is that when I talk to people, if people ask, what are you doing this semester? And I don't really have time to explain. I tend to just say, I just don't really have a flat. I'm just crashing on couches for a while. And they just completely accept that as normal. Oh, I did that for a semester. Oh, yeah, my friends are doing that this year. It's what I'm doing isn't necessarily new. It's just a new method of, I'm just doing it for charity. So I think people are pretty open about it.
But there's an element of wanting to change the idea too that Dunedin, if you Google, for instance, Dunedin and couch, right, you get couch burning.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I think people are quite stoked with an opportunity to show that there's more to Dunedin and more to the student community than, you know, just the couch burning thing, which, I don't know, I think Dunedin students get quite a bad rap quite often, and there's so much more down here, and there's so much more like generosity and so much more to the community. So I think people are pretty stoked to be able to show that, I think. So,
how much can you raise?
With my donations, I'll be looking at $4,000, just over. So that will be for 6 months' rent and food and power and all of that. So that'll be about $4,000.
And that's enough for a scholarship for someone else, is it?
Yeah, so that will hopefully cover someone else's rent and expenses for a semester. Essentially, it will just translate directly over. But would love donations as well to the Give a Little page. A few people have done something that was pretty cool and just giving me $1 or $2 each week that I stick it out, which, you know, is pretty good motivation.
Are you going to stick it out?
I hope so, yep. That's the plan. If it all turns to custard, we can just donate what's happened, but like what I've already collected, but the plan for now is to stick it out all the way through, and I think it's pretty achievable.
Tiana Fratelli and her kindness ending our program tonight, speaking to Ian Telfer. Thank you for being with us. Checkpoint will be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Wellington College has announced how it will punish 2 boys who boasted on social media about having sex with drunk girls. New Zealander Chris Liddell has been named in new accusations about conflicts of interest among United States President Donald Trump's advisors. A former council engineer says an Auckland landlord whose block of flats was flooded knew about the risk. The acting Prime Minister, Paula Bennett, says an agreement for John Key and David Cunliffe to leave Parliament was struck by the 2 MPs themselves. Human remains found on Fox Glacier have been identified as a British tourist who was one of 7 people killed in a helicopter crash in 2015. And a Swiss national who failed to return from a fishing trip near Arthur's Pass has been found safe and well.